Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by President Václav Klaus, who has served as both the Prime Minister and the President of the Czech Republic. So welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Good morning.
So you also are very known for being a very prolific writer. Your most recent book in defense of normalcy is also now available. I will leave a link in the description for those who are interested. And again, I'm not sure how many books by now, but it's quite a few.
So, quite a few. Yeah. I have been writing too much. I am afraid I should be doing something else more efficiently than just writing books.
Well, your readers probably disagree, but that's good.
Very good.
So I wanted to discuss with you today Europe because we appear to be facing many crises. Some point out the crisis of values with the excesses of woke ideology, or what you term the woke revolution. We have a foreign policy often determined by how the EU wish the world is as opposed to how it actually is. There's often a lot of criticism about the EU bureaucracy and lacking of democratic accountability, and of course war. So there's a lot of crisis racking up, but you've been one of the people who have been speaking and writing about these issues for many years. So I was hoping you can share some of your insights. And I guess a good place to start could be what's happening today, though, with the European Parliament holding a vote of no confidence in the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. I was wondering if you can share some of your thoughts on the problems.
Definitely, with great pleasure. But I just wanted to return to one of your points. You started discussing Europe and then mentioned criticizing bureaucracy in Europe, and then you mentioned the war. I think the shift from criticizing the European bureaucracy to criticizing the war, which European Union is implicitly and in many respects also explicitly supporting, is a totally different topic, totally different issue. So to criticize the European Union for the irrational bureaucracy and the centralism, which reminds me of communism, is really one level of the discussion which was relevant for the last, let's say, 35 years. But what is going on now is a different story, different problem, and I feel very strongly about it.
Yeah. How do you see, if we, let's circle back to this one. But how do you see the problem of bureaucracy, though, to have been a root issue?
Bureaucracy. I hesitate to talk about bureaucracy in the European Union, and it has its history. In the communist era, we were frustrated for many things, and we tried to criticize things. The only critic which was possible in the communist era was the critique of bureaucracy, because it was understood by the political leaders that it's not a critique of the substance of the system, but just the way how the government and authorities function. So the criticizing bureaucracy was the everyday topic in the Czechoslovak newspapers in the communist era, really. So we are rather reluctant to limit our criticism of the European Union on the basis of bureaucracy. But you mentioned the European Parliament and its non-confidence vote. One thing is the vote and potential results of it, which we can easily expect the results. For me, a new moment in the history of the European Union was the speech given by Madame Ursula von der Leyen on Monday afternoon or Monday evening. It was really something incredible. The way how she disregarded all potential criticism of her work and of the work of the European Commission is again something I can only compare with the way how it was done in the communist era. So this is a new stage, new level of the arrogancy of the leading person of the European Union, which she presented today, because everyone who dares, according to her, who dares to criticize anything in the European Union is an agent of Putin. This is such a joke, which, again, I must mention the communist experience. Anything substantially critical was that we are the agents of the American imperialism. I can never forget that.
Yeah. No, I saw that she dismissed the people who criticized her, not on the actual arguments, but rather that they were conspiracy theorists and propagandists for Putin, which is a way of saying anyone who criticizes is an enemy of the state almost. It's it's a very dark path to go down. But it didn't appear out of nowhere. And again, I often think about when I see the EU taking a bit of a wrong turn. I often think about a speech you made at the EU Parliament. I think it was back in 2009 that no one should claim to monopolize on the concept of European integration.
Yeah, this is already, I am sorry to say, this is already the history. It's 16 years ago. And my speech there was probably in the history of the European Union. It was one of the first substantially critical speeches to the European Union. Well, I will never forget it. Nevertheless, it's over. There are different politicians in many of our countries. They don't know what happened at that time. So we can't base our thinking on the past. We have to criticize the current situation.
Yeah. Well, one thing that is, I guess, relatively new compared to back in 2009 was this, as you've spoken a lot about, the woke revolution. And again, in conflict with the more traditional European values. Now, it's often argued that the woke revolution was imported by the United States, but it does seem it's more powerful in Europe. What do you make of this? In terms of where it comes from and the disruptiveness.
Yeah, you are right saying that the woke, or I speak more often about progressivism. It, we still don't have the right name to criticize what is going on. Definitely, it's now much worse in Europe. Nevertheless, this ideology was born not in Europe, but in the United States of America. Europe has been importing progressivism and wokeism from the United States of America till the moment when Trump succeeded in winning the presidential elections. Yeah, that's definitely different. Nevertheless, it didn't start in Europe, so I don't have anything special to say about that. Uh,
And well, how about the election of Trump? I mean, the man has obviously many flaws, but he does appear to be a very powerful force in the United States that has reversed this. Do you see this as being durable, or do you see any similar movements in Europe. I guess I'm not sure how you would define him, as a counter-revolutionary, or how.
Well, to speak about approaching revolution in Europe is absolutely impossible. I don't see anything like that. And when I mentioned that von der Leyen's speech on Monday, it is an example, a proof of the fact that nothing has changed in Europe. You know, the results of the European elections last year were relatively promising, but I would really say relatively only. It's very good that there are patriots in the European Parliament. Nevertheless, European Parliament is not a parliament, and therefore it doesn't play a very significant role. So, well, Trump is a change. Trump is a fundamental change. Trump's election victory shattered the world and shaken the world, you know. But it was just the beginning, and it gave us, as we often speak about, the window of opportunity. Of course, Trump offered us a window of opportunity, but the next step depends on all of us, not just on Trump.
But do you think Meloni or anyone else in Europe has the potential of causing similar disruptions, or
I am afraid not.
no?
You know, my best friend among world politicians has been for a very long time Viktor Orban in Hungary. But to my great regret, the revolution in Europe cannot start in a small country. The revolution in Europe must be done in one of the big European players, and I don't see any chance of a revolution in France. On the contrary, and especially I don't see any chance, any approaching the revolution in Germany, which is absolutely tragic. On the contrary, the victory of Merz and is in the elections in January was really a tragic result, and I'm afraid it moves Europe backwards. You know, so I don't see any revolution. I know that there are many Europeans who are against what is going on in Europe, but they are still very weak, unorganized, and when I look at the individual patriots parties, you know, it's great that they exist. I am very much in favor of that movement, but it's still a relatively unclear political thing.
But what is in the. Well, you can say that, of course, that some of this woke ideology, I think you as well have pointed out that some of it has origin from Germany's Frankfurt School.
With Frankfurt to Schule.
But is there, what does it all mean for the European nation state? Because this is seen to be, what was able to balance the conservatism with the liberal values. It kind of became a very sturdy vessel for both. But do you see this as being under threat as well?
You know, I am very cautious talking about values. Values, this is a term which has been misused in the European discussions, and Madame von der Leyen speaks very often and repeated many times during her Monday speech the reference to non-existent European values. This is a non-existent program, which this is just a formal way of speaking about in principle nothing. I'm sorry. This is not just the European values. You started with Europe. I have many troubles in discussing Europe. What it really means. I don't accept putting together Europe and European Union. European Union is a political entity which started wrongly and is not authentic, and it's an artificial creation which doesn't really represent the people on the European continent. But the problem is that the European continent is not a nation state. It's not the European continent doesn't have citizens, doesn't have in German das Volk, doesn't have the substance of creating. I think that we very often talked about European identity, but I'm afraid that in principle the European identity is relatively very, very weak. I am someone who feels I am a Prager, born in Prague, who spent all my life here. I am definitely, and this is the crucial identity for me, I'm a Czech, At the same time, I am a Slav, something which now to use that term means immediately that you are friend or agent of Putin. So, but I feel being a Slav, and I feel being as Central European. But for me, Europe as such is a very weak identity. I when I look at the cities around the Czech Republic, Krakow and Dresden and Munich and Vienna and Salzburg, etc., they are part of my feel there almost at home. But for me, Lisbon, Helsinki, and then I don't know, Sofia is something totally different.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, that's a very common and reasonable criticism that the European Union is not Europe. Yeah, to a large extent, this is, as you said, also what Orban is arguing very fiercely for, that indeed the European Union appears to be undermining much of what we used to consider, I guess, Europe.
Mr. Professor, I was president of the country when the Czech Republic entered the European Union, and I will never forget the next days and weeks I have been traveling over the EU, and I was greeted everywhere with a totally wrong statement. Welcome in Europe. I couldn't stand it. And I said that even in the darkest communist days, we were part of Europe. It's what we entered on the 1st of May 2003. 2004 was the European Union, not Europe. So it's very difficult to discuss Europe as such. It's a continent, and but not an entity which can create a citizen.
But the Europeans, though, we have, many states. Most of them are smaller or medium-sized, and I tend to like the core idea of Europe being using collective bargaining power, that is finding some form of a integration. I do think that the EU has obviously lost its way. I don't understand really the path it's going down now. I think it's providing good governance, economic prosperity, or security for that sake. But there has to be some format, wouldn't there, for the Europeans to cooperate, to have a role in the world?
Well, the European Union is everything else, not just the institution for cooperation. Cooperation means something else. People like me really want to cooperate in Europe as much as possible. Therefore, the original idea of European integration was undoubtedly a positive one. But what has changed is the moment when a European original entity, European community, was transformed into European Union. To create a political entity out of the European member states is really a totally different task than economic and integration in many other respects, and especially something else than cooperation, because cooperation means voluntary doing things together, political unification of Europe, which basically started in 1992 with Maastricht Treaty, and then was further developed in the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, is a different story. So I am a long time critic of this development.
I want to pivot a bit to the war in Ukraine, because a lot of the behavior now of people like von der Leyen, or the economic problems we're having, or the security problems, a lot of this, of course, it preceded the war in Ukraine, but it's been exacerbated significantly as a result of Ukraine. So it's kind of become the big elephant in the room. So how can we understand, or ideally understand, in order to resolve this crisis? Because it's again, it's for many people, it seemed as if it happened all of a sudden back in 2022, but this has been, others have warned for a long time, for you being one of them, for more than a decade, that we could be heading down this path. How can we understand and ideally resolve this war, as no one benefits from this anymore?
Mr. Professor, you are right, stressing that the war in Ukraine didn't start on the 24th of February 2022. This is just the way how some political commentators and some politicians of today are interpreting the situation. We, all of us, understood that the problem was there for years, at least for the last decade, and we talked about it, make speeches, wrote articles, criticized what is going on, but no one tried to listen. So to suddenly, as it started, to suddenly stop the war is, in my understanding, impossible. It would be possible to make a ceasefire, okay, and I am very much in favor of that, to stop killing and destroying many other things, not just human lives, is tragic and unexcusable. But the world should start seriously negotiating, talking, which is not the case. President Trump promised to stop the war in 24 hours after being inaugurated. It didn't materialize. Because it's impossible to say, as Trump sometimes says, that now I am not happy that you don't want to make a deal, so I will go out of it. No, all of us know that the Ukraine war is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. Everyone is aware of the fact that it's a war between the West and Russia, and Ukraine is just a player in the game, and then Ukraine is the victim of that war. But during the war, Ukraine started to move somehow differently, and that's another story. But Ukraine is the main victim of the war for me.
No, I agree with that, and it's well, one of the disappointments within not just the European Union but also many European states has been that for 3 years, all these people were dying on the front line, both Russians and Ukrainians, that there was no diplomacy. Recently, President Macron picked up the phone and talked to Putin for first time, I think it was over 1,000 days. It's a bit shocking given that we have such a massive war in Europe and we can't even talk to the other side anymore. But you mentioned, that the Ukrainians are a player in the game, that it's a wider conflict between the West and Russia. If through this prism, though, how can this conflict be fixed? Because when the Russians refer to Ukrainian neutrality, it's not just a reference to Ukraine; it's a reference to, I guess, wider European security system. So, if the Western countries would sit and negotiate with Russia, beyond any territorial disputes, what is it that we have to resolve in Europe to, I guess, end the source of this conflicts?
Well, I have to repeat that it's not easy to start to solve it now. It should have started much, much earlier. And there is no excuse for the world superpowers, international organizations, United Nations, even the European Union, not to enter into the game much explicitly, much earlier. They all of them should be searching for a solution which wouldn't lead to a war. Tragic mistake of the international community, basically of all of us. I said, Russia made tragic mistake as well. Russia should be inventive enough to come with a different solution than a war. But it's too late to say that. And nevertheless, the negotiations is the only way out. The only way out. And I hope that Trump will be able to do something in this respect. Otherwise, I don't see anyone who would be able to make a fundamental difference. This is not definitely one of the European leaders as Macron. By the way, I wouldn't believe him very much in a sincere way of thinking.
No, no, I guess many people don't seem as very sincere, given that he, for many years argued that we would have to find a way of resolving the conflicts we have with the Russians, and now suddenly not speaking to them anymore. But in many ways, the war has made the disputes that preceded the war more complicated, because Macron were one of the people used to argue that we can't create a Europe without Russia, because it would become a Europe against Russia. But because of the war, we have to find a way of solving the issue with Russia, given that it has the largest population in Europe. It's the largest territory in Europe, the largest military, and also in terms of purchasing power parity is also the largest economy in Europe now. So keeping it out of Europe would be a source of perpetual conflict. On the other hand, after this long proxy war, it's a lot of countries in Europe have, we can say, legitimate concerns. Often the Baltic states, of course, are very vocal. So, how do you solve this problem now? Because, as I said, a lot of things appear to have become more complex now over the past 3+ years.
It becomes more complex, but we must get rid of some wrong and, in my understanding, stupid assumptions, because these assumptions and prejudices practically kill any rational discussion. I can imagine being a Baltic state to be afraid of what could potentially happen. Definitely, this is the reality. Nevertheless, to present Russia as a country which wants to rule Europe and continue going its armies through Ukraine to Central and then Western Europe is a joke. It's not a serious debate, and this can't be the substance of any potential future negotiations. We all of us know that Russia has a big problem to move 500 meters forward somewhere and to come into and to reach the territory of another Ukrainian village. It's a joke about Russia to try to invade Germany and France is beyond my understanding and beyond my interest even to discuss. Nevertheless, some European politicians, and I must say, to my great regret, even Czech politicians are repeating that same nonsense. But as you mentioned, and I agree fully, the ceasefire is the first stage, and the ceasefire, difficult ceasefire, by the way, but the ceasefire will make the situation a little bit not so sharp, I guess, and the negotiations could be could undergo in a more positive atmosphere.
What I hear from Moscow, though, is that the reason they wouldn't want a ceasefire is because they see the war now going increasingly their way. So their main concern is if they do a ceasefire, they would be presented, it would function as another Minsk agreement. So for the Europeans to buy themselves some time to rearm. So how can we overcome this hurdle? Because this is it's a reasonable criticism, and but I'm not sure how to overcome it, because I can see also the argument why a ceasefire would be good while negotiating, because all of these men dying every day doesn't make the negotiations any easier.
Ceasefire is a ceasefire, which means it must be done in accepting the situation as it is, to ask for one army or another return back 1,000 kilometers is not a ceasefire. It's a total change of conditions and preconditions for any solutions. Simply a ceasefire must be done accepting the current situation between the armies of one side or another. Zelensky is talking about a different ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire, but a return year, 2 years, 3 years before what is there. That's not a ceasefire. So let's accept that ceasefire is a stage number one. Stop.
And well, we recently had also a NATO summit. We're supposed to arm ourselves, use 5% of GDP for weapons. In the past, we weren't able to reach 2%. So this is a very ambitious goal. And it also appears to be happening now at a time when the European economies have some significant problems and have to readjust to a different economy. Do you see this as likely to be achieved, or is it desirable to be achieved? How do you interpret these new goals of NATO?
No. I don't think it is serious. Practice, with the exception of Poland, no one country in the world is just moving to reach that target. And I remember the moments when we had a problem to have 1%, 1% to 1.4%. Now we succeeded in fulfilling the 2% level just by paying something in advance for American fighters. There is no capacity in spending 5% on and now the point is on what? On attacking a country or just trying to keep the country in a good shape, So I don't think 5% is a rational idea. Another issue is whether we are able to do it when we face the crazy misuse of money by Green Deal and by practically creating a huge inflation on our territories. So competing targets is another issue, but 5% as such is not for defense; it's for attacking, and that's something I can't accept.
No. Well, the last topic I wanted to ask you about is something you also spoken about, which is the wider changes in the international system. That is the unipolar order established after the Cold War, when, well, effectively the United States and the political West was the only game in town. It appears to be coming to an end, and you've also noted the emergence of BRICS. What do you see Europe's role being in this new world? Because we appear to bet everything on this partnership with the United States for, I'm not sure if you would call it collective hegemony, but as the world now changes to a more multipolar system and BRICS now it's larger than the G7, what does Europe do, and what should Europe do, I guess, in this world?
Well, the move from unilateralism in the last, let's say, 20, 25 years, after so many decades of bipolarism in the fight between communism and capitalism, we are moving slowly to a multipolar world. But this movement is not just a decision. This is the consequence of differing strengths of various parts of the world. So we are moving definitely to a multipolar world, but we are not yet there. And the existing hegemon is doing maximum to continue his unique position, which he demonstrates based now this time not just in the Ukraine war, but in the Gaza and the Middle East topic, which I am really frustrated because of. So the move to multilateralism is a slow evolutionary process. It can't be solved by making a conference of some selected countries. Definitely, the ambitions of BRICS countries to do something is okay. I am very much in favor of that, but I wouldn't be expecting too much very soon.
The concern for me, though, would be that it would return to some kind of a bloc politics. But I don't know, in my opinion, it would be ideal perhaps if we could find some arrangement where the United States, Europe could work with BRICS instead of having this hardened wall between who's on the inside or outside. But in the wider problem, though, between the United States and Europe, how do you see this affecting the relationship? Because the United States appears to be signaling to the Europeans that in a multipolar world, Europe will not be the main priority anymore. Indeed, it might not be second, it might be a distant third. Do you see it being difficult to preserve the partnership that was here, not just for the past 30 years, but many decades more?
One thing is partnership, really organizationally done. Another thing is the real closeness of not just Europe and America. We at least I implicitly, I a priori accept that we are the West, that we are both Europe and United States of America are the Western civilization. This exists whether there will be conflicts between Ursula von Leyen with Trump or not. That's the reality. So I hope to speak about partnership is already technical issue for me. We have to fight for the continuation of the Western civilization against all enemies of that, and these enemies are hidden in all the new rather fashionable isms or ideologies, the progressivism or wokeism, as you call it. Definitely multiculturalism is for me a fatal mistake of the intellectuals of the current world, and environmentalism, which is the basis of the Green Deal's nonsenses in the world. That's part. Genderism, fundamental attack on Western values and traditions. That's a big problem for me in the long run.
Yeah, my last question, just something that appeared to be a bit of a common thread. You mentioned rationality more than once. Do you think this is a key challenge for Europe? A lack of rational thinking, or I'm just wondering how, from a lot of these cultural revolutions to the I guess unwillingness to speak to opponents such as the Russians, do you see this as being an issue of rationality or just stubborn unilateralism, or how do you interpret this?
Rationality. I'm not sure we have to return to fight for basic real values, not Madame von der Leyen's values. And the value number one, which should be the basis of our thinking, and this is what we learned in the communist era, really, fundamentally, this is the question of freedom. Freedom is for me the basic principle which puts together the West, and we are either for freedom or against it. And I'm afraid that though these new ideologies talk about everything else, not about freedom, and freedom is something many people take for granted, but we know that it is not granted. And then, as I think Ronald Reagan put it, that freedom is something which all generations every 25 years must be fought for again. So I would talk about freedom, not just rationality.
I like that. Well, President Klaus, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, probably writing your next book, so I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.